Capitalism versus Socialism, an injunction based on cybernetics. Mexico is a confusing mix of capitalism and socialism. But when hundreds of thousands of poor Mexicans migrate each year, they choose the United States, even though hundreds might die in the journey. In Cuba's direction, Mexican migration is zero. This means that when people with very little education vote with their feet, they choose a capitalist system 1,000,000 to 1 over a socialist regime. The United States is capitalist to the extreme. Cuba is as socialist a country as they come. Now, here is the paradox. After 50 years of a failed revolution, Cuba is slowly beginning to breed freedom lovers. But after 230 years of the most successful capitalist system in the world, American universities are rapidly mass-producing young, radical socialists. Rather than explain why this is happening, in this video, I would rather use cybernetics to compare both systems of government. Hello, I am Javierlivas, an attorney and activist for freedom, democracy, and transparency in Mexico, and I am also a cybernetician. I will compare capitalism and socialism using a new metric called Requisite Variety, an idea that belongs to cybernetics and the loss of control. Here are two acceptable definitions of the two rival ideologies. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit, and it allows capital accumulation, wage labor, voluntary exchange, and a price system and competitive markets. Socialism, on the other hand, is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or at least regulated by the community as a whole, meaning the state. Examples are Cuba, the former USSR, and North Korea. To help me present both sides are the arguments of two very popular figures on YouTube. Capitalism has a staunch defender in the person of Jordan Peterson, a well-known Canadian psychologist and author. He says that capitalism creates enormous wealth, generates development, gives everyone a chance, and ensures freedom. On the other hand, socialism, he says, creates an absurd centralization of power, an almost certainty of corruption, it is impossible to compute, and suppresses freedoms. A self-appointed rival of his is Peter Joseph, who defends socialism. He says that a market can be created from scratch with modern technology, even without the need of money, using networking and artificial intelligence. He says that capitalism is not sustainable, is inherently contradictory, structurally flawed, ensures injustice and inequality. And he says, on the other hand, that socialism is not what the USSR had, that it had state capitalism, and that socialism is possible today using technology, that the happiest countries on earth have it, a form of socialism, and that it should ensure everybody's basic needs. He says the entire basic simple idea of socialism, or frankly, just any kind of design-oriented public health approach, is that you allow people to have support on many levels so that they don't have to worry about their most fundamental needs, allowing them to pursue other things. To settle the confrontation between capitalism and socialism once and for all, I will introduce Asby's law of control, also known as the law of requisite variety. If I want to compare the power of two automobiles, I need Newton's laws of motion. If you want to talk about controlling any organization effectively, you need Asby's law. This is how important Asby's law is. What it says is that only variety can absorb variety. Variety is a measure of a system's complexity, and to control that variety, you need the regulator to match it with its own regulating variety. However, there's a trick. The regulator has two strategies. It can cut down or filter the variety of the system, see the filter or attenuator, or the regulator can also amplify its own control variety, the bottom part of the drawing. Control results when this variety equation is balanced or satisfied. You are probably familiar with this graph called the circular economic flow of a market economy. The green hexagon on the left is the people. The red capsule is the production system or the firms that produce the goods and services. Money flows from people to buy goods and services at the market and onto the firms, the green arrow going right on the top, and people supply capital, dark blue, to the firms, and firms repay the capital with money made from selling goods and services. This looks pretty neat and orderly, and everything is balanced and works out perfectly. However, there is a huge catch to this system which is not shown here. You need massive amounts of control to make this work. So now let's change the flow to show how control has to flow in an economy. We use the variety equation because we have to meet the laws of control. Here is the same model of an economy, except that I show the control loop that regulates the relationship between the firms and the people. You have an amplifier going left and a filter going right. The goods produced are amplifiers for the people that buy them. For instance, a car amplifies your ability to transport yourself. Filters are the things that firms do not offer. For instance, you cannot order a cheese pizza the size of an elephant. The point is that demand and supply have to balance out, and the money flow is going both ways and has to balance out and serves as record keeping. In a free market economy, the people and the producers are in an accelerated control loop relationship. That is, the more people buy, the more the producers offer. And this loop is controlled by nature. Resources get depleted. Because we are talking about control, in this graph I introduced the government, showing that its control loop over the market is tenuous. In fact, government amplifiers help business. For instance, intellectual property laws allow businesses to profit from their innovations. They help the inventor and keep a check on hackers or thieves. Government is ready also to enforce the fulfillment of private contracts. All this has to do with handling control variety constructively. In this way, The capitalist system's variety is made to explode. The government allows you to do your thing. It rewards your innovation, and the size of the government is kept as small as possible. Most of the regulation variety is provided by the economic system itself, running as free as possible and in a self-organized way. Of course, the whole system consumes a lot of energy, but filters or prohibitions are kept at a minimum. People choose not to limit personal freedoms unless they have no other choice. And the process is democratic. This is why it is called a free enterprise system. Plus, and this is very important, the people control the government in general and the executive through the Constitution and elections and the legislative and judiciary. Constitutional freedoms are also acting as de facto filters to government activity. For instance, the government cannot regulate religion or confiscate firearms or suppress the press or the freedom of speech. Here is a model of Asby's laws at work. Now let's see how socialism tackles the variety equation. First of all, the amount of variety is reversed. Now it is the government that has the highest total variety and uses it to suppress the people's variety, or the people's freedom of choice and the liberty to do many things, many different things. It also suppresses the variety of the production facilities which it owns. It is worth noting that in the socialist system, the people have no control over their government. The two loops that we saw connected people and the government in a democracy are absent in the socialist system. Socialism means precisely that the collective good has a priority. The individual sacrifices himself or herself in favor of the group. Once the group leadership takes over, it controls the bureaucracy, and the individual has no access to the seat of power, directly or indirectly. He or she have now delegated their power to those in control. This is the reason why socialism becomes a closed system. Whatever control variety it has is used to lower the demand variety of the individual. It is really a form of, shall we call it, long-range planning, in the sense that the people are putting long-range trust in those in power. The system has no adaptation, no learning, no self-auditing, no self-correction. It runs blindly like the USSR did until it collapses for lack of requisite variety, in spite of the efforts to reduce demand variety. Instead of the people being the ultimate control, it is the group in power who is in total control. Big control amplifiers are police systems, use of spies, etc. On the filtering side of the control loop, you have a huge bureaucracy to filter and slow down popular demands, and a total lack of accountability. Government is oversized and macrocephalic and too busy regulating everything. The big difference between capitalism and socialism is that while capitalism amplifies variety and choice, socialism cancels variety and choice. They both try to satisfy Asby's law and the control equation balance, but the strategy is totally different. Socialism also has a big assumption. It assumes that the government can predict consumer variety and produce enough goods and services through centralized planning. Maybe capitalists also ignore the existence of Asby's law, but they do not assume they can satisfy the equation. They leave that to the markets to work it out. The intelligence the government lacks, they let the market provide it. After Norbert Wiener wrote his book on cybernetics in 1947, the engineers, mathematicians, and other USSR intellectuals became very enthusiastic about cybernetics. Later, during the Cold War, they tried again and again and again to set up a computerized system to plan and control all production and match it with the demands for goods and services. The story ends in a patchwork solution. The story is called Internet: Why the Soviet Union did not build a nationwide computer network. It was written by Slava Jerovich. By the way, computers can be a menace if used incorrectly to generate perturbation variety instead of providing control variety. In this graph by Stafford in his book Designing Freedom, computers contribute to provoke a system to go out of control. We see that variety is amplified by the computer, not reduced or filtered, and the regulator gets swamped. Again, it is a fallacy on behalf of Peter Joseph to continue to assume that modern technology can create a socialist, centralized planned economy where everybody gets its basic needs for free. Again, you lack requisite variety. One thing is to respond real time to some perturbation, and another very different is to try to anticipate demand and be ready when it comes. As Akoff said in UNAM in the early 2000s, do not plan long term. It is better today to develop capabilities to respond to whatever shows up. No socialist ideologist will ever even understand what these words mean, much less incorporate them into their mental maps. Viable systems are made of other viable systems that are nested and that have the maximum autonomy possible. The opposite of socialism. Another fallacy of the socialist mindset is to say that necessity is the mother of invention and conclude that innovations have nothing to do with free markets. I don't see the iPhone getting invented anywhere else but in the United States. People did not know the iPhone was possible, so how could they have needed something that did not exist? I am beginning to feel foolish having to argue these things. It underscores the urgent need for bright and otherwise intelligent people to dig deeper into what cybernetics has to offer. Given the recursive nature of all viable organizations, business corporations and even nation states have the same equivalent communications and control connections as humans. To cybernetic laws, they are structurally the same. Although invented by lawyers, corporations become as real as a living person. Lawyers also put the separation of powers into the US Constitution and came up with the protection of intellectual property. Information gives life to things that seem inanimate. Marx mentions information 4 times in his Das Kapital, and knowledge not more than 10 times. Both words distant from the use we give them today as something with intrinsic value. He is not to blame. Blame those who even today share the same blindness and endorse socialism without knowing what it needs to make it work. An appalling and generalized loss of individual liberties in a crazy attempt to balance the variety equation. Efficacy, efficiency, homeostasis, and every machine and everything with a purpose of its own needs information. You figure it out. How can Marxism apply when we know this? As to the future of capitalism, capitalism is safe from socialism taking over, more so given that the society continues to get more and more complex. Socialism's central planning and excessive control is the equivalence of a person with a very limited brain power. They cannot learn as fast or not at all. They cannot innovate, they cannot recognize their mistakes, and certainly cannot adapt on their own. Shown here is the UMS-7 model, which is very close to describing the current structure of the capitalist nation state. This model, with its 7 systemic functions in place, works for any government organization and every business corporation. UMS-7 is built using Requisite Variety. It is a model that embodies control principles. Therefore, it is not debatable. Nobody debates the laws of motion. Nobody debates the existence of gravity. The same rigor applies to the laws of control. Once discovered, we cannot ignore them in anything we do. The future is a convergence towards the laws of viability and respecting the laws of control. Capitalism has several big problems generated from its own success as a change agent for humanity. First, representative democracy forces a territory-based system when it should be based on knowledge areas such as energy, infrastructure, transportation, transformation, telecommunications, commerce, recycling, etc., as shown here. Getting there will not be easy, but it would bring incredible savings to everybody. It is undeniable that capitalism is still too wasteful. It consumes a lot of resources, some of them not renewable. Pleasing the public in everything sounds very idealistic, but in long range, counterproductive and can lead to inescapable traps. Capitalism can have a recursive structure where cooperation and competition coexist, depending on the recursion level. Capitalism will not cease to exist. It will just evolve naturally as the power of cybernetics, the super science of interconnectedness, enters the mainstream in the public's mind. Capitalism is a culture which must allow the people to have greater control over large companies, the banks, and the government. Adopting a circular and sustainable economy requires changing the mental models carried by millions of people in their heads. This challenge is augmented when capitalist countries allow immigration of millions of people who do not work, do not share their values, and are not interested in collaborating with the system they have joined. There is a limit to the free lunches a government can provide, and there's a threshold for free riders. Beyond that threshold, free riders will corrode the rest of the society in a tumor-like fashion until they destroy their host. This is not a problem of race, but a lack of alignment to reach shared goals. Peace and security. Capitalism can lead the world towards peace and security for all. However, we must accept the fact, whether in gun control or the war on drugs, requisite variety usually is achieved by self-organization and self-control that starts at the individual person level. The state does not have, nor would it ever have, enough requisite variety to ensure that every single person within the nation-state's borders complies with every law in existence and all the time. However, society at large knows everything that is going on. Dave Snowden has been harnessing this knowledge, and it can be put to good use while at the same time preserving individual freedoms, something socialists know very little about. Knowing the very basics of Asby's cybernetics is of enormous practical use today. Thinking in terms of requisite variety, amplifiers, filters, and black boxes allows you to understand the exact nature of the problems before you. Asby says at the end of the book that any problem is always a problem of correct selection. Today, you've made a good choice. Thank you.